Our next panel deals specifically with the question of DEI and its ramifications, and we're going to stay right there. We have on the panel from he's the new president of the Center for Political and Economic Studies, the Joint Center, we call it. And many of you that's been in there in a while may remember about maybe 20 years ago, he was our field director here at National Action Network. He's a NAN baby. And he was there when I was running for president. He was there when I went to Cuba. And he's got one of the unique experiences in life where he was there when Fidel Castro and I had lunch. And Fidel Castro was telling me what the count was in Florida in 2000. And I felt that was the strangest thing in the world. I'm having the president of Cuba telling me how Gore and Bush's count was. And Dedrick was at the table. So he had a lot of experiences with us, and we're glad to have us. When Dr. Watson asked me, is it all right to have Dedrick Muhammad, I said, you ought to be asking Dedrick, is it all right for you to come? Because Dedrick is a NAN baby. Give a hand, Dedrick Muhammad. Next to him is the queen herself. All of this debate about critical race theory started with the actions, academic heroism, and the stand-up as a real queen and giant should and would of Professor Kimberlé Crenshaw. And we go way back, but let me tell you, the things that she's had to endure for standing up and defining what critical race theory was, defining what DEI was, from death threats to threats in her career, and she's a professor at UCLA and Columbia. She's bi-coastal, but she stood strong and she has been firm, and we're proud that she would break in her schedule and come and be with us today. Give another hand, Professor Kimberlé Crenshaw. Next to her is my sister. I mean, we are sisters and brothers, are real. You talking about something, well, y'all that watch the 11th hour, you already know. You know, at MSNBC, I did Morning Joe this morning, you know, they give a lot of hosts the teleprompter. They give her a blank screen because she gonna just say what she wanna say. They don't put nothing up. They know that Stephanie gonna just run with Stephanie, and that's why she has the audience she has, and I'm so honored that she would come spend time with National Action Network. Give a hand, Stephanie Ruhle. And then I've been very much involved in reading and studying some of the work of Alvin Tillery, Dr. Alvin Tillery, who is very deep. I try to act erudite and intelligent when I'm talking to him. Drop all my Brooklyn stuff. But he is a PhD director of the Center of Study of Diversity and Democracy at Northwestern University. Give a hand, Dr. Tillery. And last but not least, I call him the Socrates of our time. But let me tell you, there's no one that has been, in my judgment, more on the cutting edge of thought in this country, black and white, and has done it heroically with his books, with his advocacy, and just for the last 2 or 3 decades, he has been a preeminent thinker from our community and writer. And he's a preacher. He's going to preach at our minister's luncheon today. And he is an activist. I get so sick of these ivory tower black thinkers that talk for us that never talk to us. And I figured out why, Kimberly, they don't talk to us is because they don't know how to communicate in our language. So they go up in the ivory tower and impress their bosses on how smart they are by talking to their bosses in their language. And the boss said, oh, they're bright, rather than talking to us down to earth, because they never come down to earth. They impersonate what they think we about rather than inform us what we about. He is the opposite of that. I'm talking about our man, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. Let me bring on our convener, our panelists, and let me say this, you got to be real sharp, because, you know, I come out of a civil rights family, and the brightest one of the families in the audience is going to critique you. Stand up, Jesse Jackson Jr. is in the house. Jesse's book on, the one on Constitution, is, now you need 4 interpreters to read that book. Because I never understood that how deep this thing was in terms of constitutional law. So I want y'all to know that he's going to explain to me what y'all said and what y'all didn't say that didn't make sense. But this brother is someone that I know well. He's now a professor at Trinity Washington University. He's the executive editor of Diverse Issues of Higher Education. He's been around National Action Network for about 20, 25 years, and he walks the walk and talks the talk. He will moderate this panel, Dr. Jamal Watson.
Good afternoon. You all can do better. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for... Oh, morning. Okay, I'm sorry. It's morning. I got ahead of myself. It's morning. Thank you for the correction there. I love the call and the response because you all corrected me right away. So thank you. But we have a real serious discussion to talk about, and that is the tax on DEI. We see states, legislatures around the country beginning to attack DEI, both in higher education and also the corporate sector. And what we're going to do this morning is we're going to dissect and talk about what is happening and how we can begin to push back. So I want to start off right away and get into it and ask, sort of, how do you all assess, panelists, where we are right now as it relates to the attacks on DEI? And I want to start with Dedrick.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. It's great to be back here at National Action Network. I think the first thing we need to recognize, I mean, it's clearly an all-out attack happening, and it's an all-out and effective attack, right? I mean, we heard what a little bit was happening with the Department of Agriculture. Just a month or so ago, there's some ruling by a judge about how the Commerce Department for Minority Business Development Agency can no longer just serve or focus on minorities, and that it has to be much bigger, which means much more likely that the minority entrepreneurs will continue to be left behind. And I was looking at the some of the T-shirts, and it was saying we won't go back. And I think, you know, what we have to, I'm going to add an addendum to that, and we must go forward, and we must go forward more rapidly, right? So they oftentimes say in sports the best defense is a strong offense, and we have to be much more offensive. At Joint Center for Political Economic Studies, black think tank for the last 54 years, we have been pushing to ensure greater diversity for top staff in congressional offices. And an early victory in 2020, they created a House Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And if you all remember, just a couple months ago, there was always concern about will the federal government be shut down because they can't get an agreement on the budget. What they did is they slipped into the bill something that would then close the House Office of Diversity and Inclusion. So we got the government open, but we shut down the House Office on Diversity and Inclusion. And we at Joint Center, want to make sure everyone understands that and how we're fighting that and how we're going to make sure we'll work with the Office of Management to ensure that some of the diversity numbers that we've been analyzing, and we have Dr. LaShonda Brown, who's been putting out a new report looking at top Senate staff about what the diversity is there. So it's been an effective attack. We have to realize that. We have to be more effective and make sure we don't go back, but that you also go forward quickly.
Thank you so much. Professor Tillery, can you weigh in on this?
So first I want to say it's great to be here, and I want to thank Reverend Sharpton for the invite. Thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. So I think what we need to step back and realize is that the attacks on DEI are really part of a broader strategy, a political strategy by the Republican Party and the Trump administration, or the Trump campaign to overturn the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And while we're wringing our hands and debating about what happens at Harvard and I went to Harvard, fine. 95% of black students in America go to schools that never used affirmative action in the first place, right? So what they're doing is they're getting us caught up in this process argument when their aims are really to reconstitute the racial order, Jim Crow. And we need to wake up to that and to know that most of this is a reaction to what happened in 2020 with the George Floyd protests. A lot of powerful, well-heeled people in the ruling classes saw their kids and grandkids out in the street in multiracial protests to demand police accountability. And so the Republicans, starting with Mr. Trump, said one way to push back on that is to ban, DEI training, right? Equity is not optional, people. Equity is enshrined in the 14th Amendment, and it's operationalized through the Civil Rights Act. So what they're doing with these attacks is trying to soften up the consciousness of the citizenry, particularly white folks, to think it's okay to ban equity. And so we're in the fight of our lives here with this election. We need to wake up and realize that and start talking about the fact that DEI programs started in corporate America and colleges because of lawsuits, because people were suing institutions that were not integrating. We need to go back to our roots and realize that we do have the power to push back against this now. But have you written to any Democratic politicians in your blue state legislatures and said, what's your legislative response to the red state's response of banning Professor Crenshaw's work? How many people have done that? Have you called your Democratic congressman, 40, 50 black members of the Congressional Black Caucus? Have you written to them and said, what is your plan for if Mr. Trump comes in and he stated explicitly on day one he's going to ban the use of EEO1 data? So what that's going to do is it's going to kill the Civil Rights Act just the way killing Section 5 preclearance of the Voting Rights Act made it inoperable. So we need to wake up. All this critique of wokeness, we're not woke enough.
Yes, sir.
We need to wake up right now and use our political power to make sure that we can be ready for the worst case scenario. And then if the worst case scenario doesn't happen, we need the politicians that claim to represent us to do more right now. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Professor Crenshaw.
Well, I'm just going to pick up where my co-panelists left off. One of the things we have to recognize is that this is not just an attack on a policy, it's an attack on a people, and that people would be us. They have made it clear for the last decade that they're going to try to reverse not only the generational election of Barack Obama and the exercise of black power, but they're trying to erase the entire apparatus of the civil rights movement. They want the whole thing. So how do you go about trying to erase 60 years of laws, legislation, policy, practices that are responsible for us being able to integrate the institutions to the limited extent that we are? Let's be clear. We're still underrepresented everywhere, except in prison, right? Those are only place we're not underrepresented. So how do you go about it? first of all, you cut up our legacy into bits and pieces, and you go after that. So first you go after the Voting Rights Act, right? You eliminate our political power to protect ourselves, and you rely on the fact that there's a fifth vote on that Supreme Court that looks like us, and made it possible to gut the most significant piece of civil rights legislation that we ever created. Then you go after the actual story, the history, our capacity to name our experience, because guess what? When you can't name an experience, you can't transform it. So when Trump signed that executive order and went after EEOC policies, diversity, affirmative action, critical race theory, 1619, implicit bias, he was coming after everything that we have accomplished. Now here's the problem. The problem is partly because it was all separated, partly because we don't really know our history, partly because we don't know what critical race theory is. A lot of people didn't see this as something that we needed to get our resource together with and address. So let me tell you, I would call up people like, what we gonna do? And people would say, what you mean we? I'm like, wait, they're coming after racial justice ideas, they're coming after our practices and our policies. A lot of people didn't see it coming. So just to be clear that we all know what they're going after when they go after our ideas, if you are a person who gives your child the talk so they can survive an encounter with police, you are practicing critical race theory. You are critical about the reality that race is going to make a difference in his or her life. That's what critical race theory is all about. So when they're coming after our ideas, they're coming after us. Diversity, equity, and inclusion was coming next. And that's exactly what happened. So here's what I think we need to be aware of. They're not going to stop until they achieve in this Reconstruction what they did in the last Reconstruction. This is all about redemption, 2024. And if you have any doubt about what they're trying to do, look at Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation. They are clear about it. They want to take away the power of the EEOC. You heard that. They want to take away a power to even collect data. We can't make a claim of discrimination if we can't collect the data. So they're going to the core of our capacity to fight and survive. That only means that we have to be there everywhere they are. We've got to contest Heritage Foundation. We've got to contest the GOP. We've got to contest Make America Great Again, because America's never great for us and we ain't trying to go back there. And lastly, we've got to make our own elected officials responsible. They are the quickest ones to say, oh, we can't talk about diversity anymore. They're giving up these programs because of this civil rights case that has nothing to do with many of the institutions that say we ain't going to do DEI anymore. 60 employees, DEI from Florida, were fired. Over 100 were fired in Texas. We should be fired up about that because they are trying to fire us across America, and we are not going to go back.
Thank you so much, Professor Crenshaw. Ms. Ruhle?
I think one of the biggest problems is misinformation and disinformation, that everyday Americans don't even know what the truth is. So Professor Crenshaw can't even get to the table to teach critical race theory because she's starting from behind zero, because there's already an avalanche of misinformation coming that you have to fight every day. And one of the big issues around DEI is that people simply don't understand. Okay, so when you think back to the financial crisis and all the banks that punished people, all the businesses that went under, did anyone say, well, all those institutions are run by white guys? No one said that. But when an institution fails, when a business leader fails, and they're a person of color, it's immediate, well, they were a DEI candidate. Last week when the bridge collapsed in Baltimore, you saw in right-wing media the mayor of Baltimore being referred to as a DEI mayor. Not a mayor of Baltimore, a diverse city. And every time you hear those things, we collectively hear those things, we have to stop them. Because one of the problems is DEI has become weaponized And people hear about it all the time, but it actually hasn't had that much success, right? On the street, you would think, my God, black women are taking over corporate America. They're not. There are more white guys named John and Steve running Fortune 500 companies than there are female black CEOs in total.
Yes, ma'am.
And this notion that white children, white teenagers cannot get into top universities because diversity candidates is also a flat out lie. Your son isn't getting into Vanderbilt because he smokes pot in your garage and plays PlayStation all day. And so what Professor Crenshaw is talking about are these big macro levels, but on a micro level, day in and day out. We have to stop these lies because these lies continue and they get into the zeitgeist of America, and that's when it ends up in suburban America of the, oh my gosh, diversity's just taken over the world. It's not. It's absolutely not. So what we have to start is to come from a place of truth and realize those who are attacking DEI are not playing fairly. They're playing dirty. And I'm not saying you have to fight dirty with dirty, but open your eyes and bring a weapon to the fight.
All right. Professor Dyson.
I teach at Vanderbilt. Where those white boys with the weed? I want to take it away from them and put it to greater use. Look, look, we know what the deal is, right? We know DEI. Now, I done seen this on the internet where DEI is the new N-word. That's what it is, right? DEI, BLM, BHM, MLK, NBA, NFL, right? Any place that is identified with black excellence against the historic onslaught of white mediocrity. DEI is dangerous because it exposes Bubba already been DEI'd from the very beginning. And diversity to a dominant culture could be you from Maine and I'm from Alabama, right? So we know that diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, they forget to add the A all the time. The truth is that this is an ongoing project from reparations, don't want that. Affirmative action, don't want that. DEI is what y'all said y'all wanted in place of real justice. So y'all now find that offensive. And as Ms. Ruhle and Professor Crenshaw and Brother Dedrick and Brother Tillery said, Dr. Tillery, the thing is that we know that white brothers and sisters have already been advantaged and benefited from the very thing they want now to deny us, claiming that we are incapable and unable to occupy these spaces. And we know already, one of the great things about Donald Trump, he kills the argument of white superiority just by speaking. Just by showing up, we know, oh damn, he is the walking fleshly deconstruction of white supremacy, white superiority, and white intelligibility. God knows literacy is off the table. So we have to, as Professor Crenshaw said, they were coming from, we thought, oh, that's the DEI, that's critical race theory. That's not us. It's all us. They're going to DEI you at the end of the day. They're going to CRT you at the end of the day. So we all got flesh in this game. We all got skin in this game. So what do we have to do? First of all, we have to identify with the fact that arguing for DEI, as some have argued, is not about bullcrap and so on and so forth. What it is about insisting that we have our seat at the table. Number two, DEI and the other forms of racial justice, it's just the floor, it's not the ceiling. Number three, Martin Luther King Jr. said in his book in 1963, Why We Can't Wait, if the nation has done something special against the Negro for 250 years, the nation got to do something special for the Negro for 250 years. Number five, we know that the greatest beneficiaries of this are white women, right? even if the white women are fronting for white men who argue against DEI while taking money under the table, right? Now, I'm not dissing white women. Thank God Stephanie's got rules, right? The thing is that we understand this is a red herring. As Professor Tillery said, they going after the whole kit and caboodle. They denied small business administration now being able to give money to African American people. Now it's got to be opened up to white folk and other folk. They want all of it. After Reconstruction, the only people who got reparation for slavery were white slave owners because they lost their help. So what you got to understand is we all in the same game. Let's support each other. Let's articulate the principles and practices that need to be put in place. Let's listen to the so-called egghead scholars, because we're going to break them eggs, scramble them, and make sure y'all get fed. That's what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Dr. Dyson. Earlier in the intro, Reverend Sharpton mentioned the protests that have been taking place by National Action Network every week, every Thursday, against Bill Ackman. One of the things that I think is really important is that we make the connection between the corporate and higher education. Mm-hmm. So, Professor Tillery, I wanted to ask you, how do we do that? Because it's not just higher ed that's under attack, but it's these corporate spaces as well. And how can we organize a response like National Action Network has been doing consistently now every single week to keep that momentum going?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I'm an academic, but I also have a lot of engagements in the world of business. I built an executive education program on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've trained about 9,000 or 10,000 people since 2019 in corporate America, mostly Fortune 500s. I also teach executive ed at the Kellogg School of Business, and I run a polling firm called 2040 Strategy Group. It's all under this vertical. So I kind of come at this from a multifocal lens. And what's clear, the affirmative action case against Harvard, because again, 95% of black students in college in America do not go to the 100 colleges that practiced race-based affirmative action, right? So just wrap your mind around that. So what was that lawsuit about? It was about a court which is packed with people that are there to serve the will of the right-wing interests that Professor Crenshaw has pointed out want to put us all back into a condition of Jim Crow, right? They did that, they broke the Harvard admissions program so that they could then go around and challenge all of these corporate programs, right? And so if you have nothing to think about affirmative action, what you do need to realize is that they just did that to get the principle that they could use to break everything else in place, right? And so when you look at the corporate response, I was talking to Stephanie and others about beforehand, like I've worked with 70 companies since 2020, right? Mostly in the Fortune 500s, and they're all in a pincer right now, right? The biggest companies they're afraid of their workers, which is why I largely got hired to work with them for the first place, right? After George Floyd, there was all this pressure to finally address, racial inequality. And people like those programs, right? The polling shows that most Americans like their corporate DEI programs. Like 77% of white people like their corporate DEI training, right? So the CEOs of these companies are in a tight position. They're getting sued by Stephen Miller and the same people that broke affirmative action, Ed Bloom, but their workers are like, are you giving up? So they're feeling pressure. So the best thing that we could do to help out these CEOs, some of them don't want to do this work, right? But they feel pressured to do it internally. The best thing we could do is demand from them an accounting. Before you buy from one of these companies, figure out, are they in the media? Are they on Stephanie's shows being reported as backing away from all these initiatives, right? Hold your dollars back, right? When you are living in a place like New York City and you're asking about what can be done, well, who's managing the capital of the pension funds in New York City, right? Make sure that your black elected officials and your white progressive officials know that you expect the people doing business with this city, with the state of New York, to not be backing away right now, right? And that's the way it won't solve the corporate issue. The corporate issue's never been perfect. We got the phrasing DEI, as Professor Dyson said, because that was a soft pedal on racial justice in the first place. The programs are not fully effective, but they're better than nothing, right? And so what we've got to do is keep the pressure on in any way we can, with protests, with voting, holding our dollars back, and demanding that these people be accountable.
Yeah, thank you.
You also have to realize that your average Fortune 500 CEO out there is neither good nor bad. They're not immoral. They're not doing the right thing. They're amoral. A CEO's job is to be a risk manager. And I'm going to say he because chances are it's a he. He is looking to pay his employees the lowest number he can pay them to ensure that they won't quit. He wants to sell the best products to the most amount of people, and he wants the world to be quiet, and he wants their share prices to go up. So once you know that this is how this business leader is being judged, then you can start to play ball. And I'm not saying that's fair, I'm not saying that it feels good, but sometimes you can't be so idealistic demanding something from someone that has a different set of rules, because he's not being judged, he's not being measured on that. So you have to, in some levels, meet them where they are, that we want these companies to work with us, we want them to do the right thing, but vilifying them 24/7 is a gift to them because it's only going to make them shy away from this and saying, this is too loud, I want to hide. We got to find ways to work with them in constructive ways. They understand who their customers are, and they understand who the next generation of the workforce is, and they have to embrace diversity.
Professor Crenshaw, you wanted to jump in?
So I want to build on both of these points, because ultimately what we have to do is change the equation on the ground so there is risk in them backing away from DEI. So the problem right now is that from that risk management perspective, the only thing they're hearing, the only images they see, the only parents who are pissed off, the only employees and the only foundations that are whispering in their ear are the ones who want to get rid of DEI. Right? Or the ones at the school board level who want to get rid of critical race theory, or the ones who want to get rid of black studies. So it means that we need to be making the noise, so they at least have to consider that I might get in equal trouble, if not more, if I actually go along with the Christopher Rufos in the world, if I actually go along with the Heritage Foundation. But we have to be willing to fight, and that is the challenge, because look, we wouldn't have been in this situation, even after the Civil War, if our allies hadn't decided, you know what, we're done with this. We're tired of it. We want to make up. We don't want to have this conflict anymore. So they threw Reconstruction under the table. They threw black people under the table. And for 70 years, we were a powerless people because our allies did not show up for us. Now we've got to look to see our allies repeating the same thing. And I want to submit that unless we put pressure on our allies, they will not show up for us again. Case in point, when the College Board decided to take out letter from the Birmingham jail, Audre Lorde, critical race theory, intersectionality, Black Lives Matter from a course that was made possible because of the George Floyd protests. They were never able to get that course mounted until people were in the streets in every state of the union demanding accountability, using the language of structural racism, talking about implicit bias. So they saw this as an opportunity to create this course, but then they ran into the DeSantis buzzsaw, who basically said, no, you ain't coming up here teaching a course about this stuff. You got to take all of these things out of it. And the College Board bent the knee. Why? Because there was more money to be made by trying to sell the course to Florida and Texas than standing their ground. But here's the thing. They don't always do that because they know there's going to be responses. They didn't take evolution out of the science courses just because the Christian right wanted them to. They didn't take gender out of the psychology course just because the right wing wanted them to. So they're taking race and our stuff out is possible because they don't think there are going to be any consequences to it. So we've got to create those consequences. I remember Adam Clayton Powell said this one thing. It was during the Crest sit-ins in the 60s. And the question was, so you are suggesting to all Negroes not to go to Crest, to boycott Crest. And he said, no, that's not right. I'm suggesting all Americans everywhere, not just in the South, everywhere, boycott Crest and any other company that is operating a segregated lunch counter in South, even if they're not doing it in the North, because it's all connected. They need to feel the pressure everywhere. So if we want to break down educational apartheid, if we want to make sure that our kids in Florida learn the same thing as our kids right here in Harlem, then we've got to put pressure on all of those appeasers who are actually facilitating this. That's the only way we change the equation on the ground.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Asante-Muhammad.
And just to build on these previous points, we have to be as extreme we have to be more extreme in our demand for justice as they're being extreme in their demands for injustice. Stephen Miller, a former aide of Trump, started organization America First, and they are filing lawsuits everywhere, even private, public sector. They're trying to end the Rooney Rule. They tried to end the Rooney Rule, and the NFL would just mean you had to interview a few minority candidates for head coaching jobs. I did a report this past fall with Institute for Policy Studies, Still a Dream, 60 years after the March on Washington for Freedom and Jobs, and it noted that we've made some progress from the 1960s to today, but in terms of income inequality, it would take another 500 years at the rate of progress we've made in the last 60 years. So we can't be like, oh, they're attacking us now. As has been stated, they've been attacking us. They've been holding us back, and they're now going for the most mild manner reforms possible in diversity and inclusion. So we can't just be moderate and say, oh, we want that back. We have to say, no, what's getting on the path to move us forward so in the next generation, we're going to get what we've all been fighting for and our ancestors have been fighting for.
Can I respond to that? Okay.
Dr. Dyson?
Yes, sir. I mean, everything, I amplify everything everybody said. We need to be Starsky and Hutch, right? We need some people out there shouting, acting crazy. Then the inside Negroes, oh my God, I can't believe the incivility of those Negroes. But they do have a point. And if you don't want them burning this shit down, you should listen to us because we have some asbestos for you. The thing is, we don't always understood that, right? Because black intelligence has never impressed white mediocrity. W.E.B. Du Bois thought we can prove to them that we are superior. We can prove to them that we are good Negroes. Martin Luther King Jr. got murdered in a suit.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Come on.
He wasn't dressed down
Come on.
with sagging pants. His high intelligence occasioned lethal opposition because nothing is as dangerous as a black person with a brain, right? So that's why they're trying to ban books. First they told us if you want to hide something from a Negro, put it in a book. They didn't say to us that's because you outlawed literacy. Now you're trying to tell us not to read books. Frederick Douglass said no greater penalty was assigned during enslavement more than black enslaved people oversleeping. Now we woke and you got a problem. The question is, why are white folks somnambulists? Why are they addicted to sleep? Because they don't want us to wake up. Because when we wake up, they are afraid that we might treat them like you done treated us. But that ain't us. Don't nobody love white folk more than Negroes. So, what we got to understand is that when they ban books, they're banning books for black people too. We don't even know our own history. We don't even study our own history. We don't even appropriate our own history. Plagiarism, you saying you plagiarized our culture. You plagiarized our work, our labor. I bet Sally Hemings wrote the Declaration of Independence. Okay, she didn't. She was 3 years old, but I'm just saying. That's another problem. I don't see nothing wrong. But what's interesting then is that what we have to do is not internalize the lie. James Baldwin said, "My father was hurt and grieved because he believed the lie of white supremacy." What you must understand, you come from a great history. You are America. America would be nothing without us. Black history is American history. Black struggle is American struggle. Black intelligence is American intelligence. That's what we got to remind ourselves of.
Thanks so much, Dr. Dyson.
Bless you, Dr.
Thank you. I want to ask Ms. Ruhle about how this issue is being covered in the media and what we can do or what the media should do in order to raise this issue in a broader way. So,
Before I answer, I actually have a question for Professor Dr. Dyson. It goes to college admissions and affirmative action. When we think about our most elite universities in this country, they have endowments in the many hundreds and hundreds of millions.
And billions.
And we look at whether it's Columbia University or Vanderbilt University, their admittance rates are less than 10%. In this idea that, well, we can't possibly do this, people don't want to give up their seat at the table. These schools are in the ultimate positions of privilege.
Right.
Why can't they simply build bigger tables? Why can't they simply admit another 500 students a year and we don't have to, I'm not being sassy, it's a genuine question.
Amen, number one. I told you Stephanie got rules. And if we had Stephanie's rules, that would be great. But here's the point. The brilliance of that point, of course, is that they can expand the table at will. There is no arbitrary imposition of a limit to which they cannot descend or ascend. That's number one, so it's great. Number two, though, when we talk about expanding that, we know a lot more white folk gonna get in with the expansion too, because they were not denied because another black person got in. They were in competition not with African American people, but with some Asian brothers and sisters that they want to change the rules for now that their competition is swamping them. Number three, you're absolutely right in this sense. If we make the argument that there is no limit on those resources, ultimately, because when you think about it, some of these universities have $9 and $10 billion endowments.
With a B.
$billion endowments. And if we expand the opportunity gap, if we close the opportunity gap and expand the ability to draw upon more resources, it is true. We would have a greater representation of what it looks like to be an American society, which means that African American people, Latinx people, that indigenous folk, that women and people of color all together would have a greater opportunity. But the problem is the same problem that keeps it limited now. It's the inability of the vast majority of white brothers and sisters to identify with those who are locked out. They see themselves in opposition to the black person who took my job, who took my space in school. What they won't understand is the necessity for solidarity so that everybody benefits. What you're saying makes too much sense. All of us could benefit. Their kids would get a greater access, our kids would greater access. But they want to say, nope, it's all for my kids. My kids earned it. Let me tell you, and I'll end by saying this. I teach at these white schools. Let me tell you, ain't no white superiority nowhere up in that place. So, what we have to be honest about is there are a few geniuses, some really smart, most average, and some dummies. That's for every race group in America. And if we could expand that table, more of us would get access.
Okay.
So that's impossible to follow with anything meaningful. That's brilliant. But I want to say, Stephanie, the reason they don't do it is also because they're hedge funds. Their point is not to educate anyone. Their point is to hold that endowment and to generate money for Wall Street and others in managing that money. 75 to 80% of the students rejected from Vanderbilt are qualified to be admitted. So they're just picking people. So what these fights are about is making sure that, wait for it, the same people from Wall Street who are giving donations to these schools to get tax breaks put their kids into the pool, and then they say, don't expand the pool, and then we've given a donation so my kid, like Bill Ackman's kid and Bill Ackman himself, who are legacies, get to the head of the line, and we can all stand around at some party and say, I went to Harvard, and I remember being in the speed club, and we used to drink there every night, and now I'm going to go into Goldman, and that's what it's about. It's not about educating anybody, right? Despite the fact that we kill it as educators there, it's not about educating.
Hell of a point. Hell of a point. Hell of a point. Hell of a point. Hell of a point.
So I would say on the media front, I think something we all have to be is more honest, more practical. I'm going to say this for a second, more forgiving and more brave in what we talk about. Because I think there's a lot of heated topics that don't get covered by the media because the media is afraid to do it. Because maybe people in this room when I walked in thought, why is this rich white lady who has the most privileged white Ivy League husband sitting at this table? And I think that sometimes the media and voices that aren't the people at risk have to become allies and talk about these things. But I also think that Democrats need to be more practical and sometimes not be so sensitive. Yes, sometimes I think that Democrats are so careful about talking about things, they're ruining their own game. They won't sing happy birthday until every kid in America has a cupcake. And that's a huge mistake, because if they don't start speaking truths or running victory laps where they should, they're gonna lose it all, right? The economy is a great example of the Democrats hate to talk about a winning economy, and because they're afraid that there are some people who are left out, and that's true. But because they don't talk about the winning economy, that leaves way for Republicans to convince the American people we're the only ones who are good for the economy, not the Democrats. And if Democrats don't start playing their game and running those victory laps, then Democrats are going to lose elections, and then the economically vulnerable people that Democrats are the most worried about are going to lose the most, because all the social programs that they're dependent on are going to get cut by Republicans. So when it comes to the media, we need to have more difficult and more practical conversations, and I think we have to take some blows and be a little more open-minded. But if you have people on television that you respect, and they respect you, even if you come from different backgrounds, even if you have different views, if you come from a place of decency with the common goal, how do we make the world better and smarter, we're all going to do better. But we've got to be brave and bold in doing that.
Can I just say this very quickly? Wait a minute. So white people, when you talk about, we agree with you, but the most snowflakey people in the world who can't take the truth are rich white people. Look, let me give you an example. Don Lemon had a show on X. Elon Musk, who bitches about it, you can't take the truth, you can't handle it, y'all a bunch of snowflakes, you're cookies, you're people who are incapable of absorbing opposition, broke down because Don Lemon asked him a few questions and he canceled his show. That's it in a nutshell. So we need allies who are not full of all lies. We need allies, as Ms. Ruhle said, who can tell the truth to other white people. I need Stephanie Ruhle to speak white folk to white folk so they can understand what the hell is that we up against and translate that for us. That's courage. That's standing up on your principles. Because I'm going to tell you what, if more Republicans weren't racist, a lot more black people would be Republican. We're reactionary, we are conservative, we're homophobic, we're transphobic. We are made for the Republican Party, but you hate niggas.
So let's talk about And the next, all right. And the last minute or two that we have, I'm hopeful that we can talk about specific outcomes that everyone can take leaving here. And I want to start with Professor Crenshaw because I know there's an event May 3rd. I know that there's resource materials that her team has brought, and I want her to share that.
All right. Well, AAPF, African American Policy Forum, has been all about trying to create those allies who speak the truth. All about trying to talk about how to talk about the things people don't want to talk about, which is race, how to talk about why we have so many book bans. What we've been doing for the last 2 years is going all around the country and passing out the books that they don't want us to have, passing out the information they don't want us to learn, passing out the language that they don't want us to have access to. But we've got to do more than just pass out books. We've got to get organized, mobilized, and we've got to show our strength all over the country. I always meet people who are outraged about the book bans, outraged about the attacks on anti-racism, outraged about the attacks on 1619, but when I ask them what they're doing about it, they might be tweeting, they might post something, but they're not organized to do something about it. So part of why I'm so excited to be here is NAN is the one organization that is organizing to do something about this stuff. So that is changing the equation on the ground. So we've been calling for the last 2 years for a day, May 3rd, to be that day that we demonstrate that there are those all around the country who are unwilling to accept being sent back to where we've come from. So what we're trying to do on May 3rd is to have multiple activations all across the country, whether it's reading The Bluest Eye, the second most banned book. Toni Morrison is the second most banned author. The brilliant Toni Morrison, what does that tell us about what they're trying to take away from us? So you can read a banned book, you can go to a teach-in, you can join us in protesting. The Heritage Foundation that is trying to pursue 2025, you can do any number of things. The most important thing is to do something and to post it, tell somebody, so that it creates a cacophony of sound all around the country of people refusing to go back. And let that be the first day of Freedom Summer 2024. Y'all know this is the 60th anniversary of Freedom Summer, which turned around the civil rights movement. It was a moment when young people came together to learn, to teach our history, because we can't exist as a democracy if people don't understand what our situation is. We're hoping that this summer, Freedom Summer 2024, is where we draw the line in the sand, where we push back, where we do what we've always done. We say this democracy, but after that, we want something more. We want a real democracy where our votes really count, where people are going to stand up and recognize that the whole thing about January 6th was about we were the ones that chose the White House. It was about Pennsylvania, it was about Philadelphia, it was about Detroit. That's what that was about. And if people aren't naming why our democracy is on life support, if they're not saying it's because of the diminished overrepresentation of white people, if they're not saying it's because we exercised our right to vote, if they're not telling the truth about it, then we're not going to be able to save it. We cannot save our democracy and leave anti-racism by the side of the road. The two have to come together. May 3rd is the opportunity for us to say that, and join us every Thursday night at 8 p.m. on Zoom for what we call a revival.
Thank you so much.
Check us out at aapf.org.
And on the third floor upstairs, there is a resource room, and Professor Crenshaw has materials and information, so I would urge you to check it out. Didn't you all enjoy this panel? Let's give them a round of applause.